Healthcare is changing, and Dr. Nancy RN is here for you. The topics are many, but each program stands on its own with 3 key action points for you to learn. Your guide to a healthier you in a changing world. Dr. Nancy RN.
Welcome to Dr. Nancy RN, Healthy You, Healthy Nation, Healthy World. This show is dedicated to you, the healthcare consumer. And to that point, we are going to bring shows to you that we hope will enhance your health and wellness. And today we have a very special guest with us. His name is Dr. Joseph Libinati. And he is an exercise physiologist, and his role is Associate Professor and Director of the Laboratory of Innovative and Translational Nursing Research, the Department of Biobehavioral Health Sciences at the School of Nursing, one of my alma maters, of the University of Pennsylvania. And he is going to be speaking with us today about to move or not to move, the health benefits of physical activity. And let me tell you about his background and why he is an expert in this area. He is one of the few non-nurses, by the way, at the University of Pennsylvania faculty, and he brings a special expertise that he can combine with the nurse experts there. And he is an exercise physiologist, as I've already mentioned, in both clinical and basic science research. And he has studied in a lab the influence of exercise cardiovascular function in a variety of disease states. But he's not going to be talking to you just about if you're sick, but really exercise is a baseline for all of us. He is a fellow in the American Heart Association and is chair of the American Heart Association's Cardiac Biology Regulation Study Section, and is a director, as I said, at the Penn School of Nursing of their physiology lab. Now, I have to tell you, Joe is practiced at TV because he has done media before, and he was at Northeastern University as a professor when he was doing some work with Channel 12 up there. So he's going to be a very sophisticated guest for us here at Studio 21, and we're thrilled to have him. So Joe, welcome. It's delightful to meet you and to have you with us today. And I know that you're going to be covering some key points for us, so I just want to review those. He's going to be talking to us about exercise versus physical activity. Now, it may sound like a fine line, but he is going to tell us the difference. And then he's going to talk about exercise and physical activity as really preventative measures. That's really hence the title, you know, to move or not to move, because it is a choice. And a lot of people don't like to move. So we're going to talk about why you have to make an investment in your health from a prevention standpoint if you are going to enjoy good health for a lifetime. And then he's going to cover very practical guidelines, sort of the tips of how much activity is required, how frequently, like say in the course of a week, the intensity, do you have to really do a lot of tough exercise, or is some of the softer exercises as beneficial, and how much time do you spend exercising? So Joe, thank you again, and just inform us about this topic.
Well, thank you, Nancy. It's my pleasure. I really appreciate this invitation to share some of this information with the public, so thank you. I guess we can start maybe with point number 1 to distinguish and contrast what the differences are between physical activity and exercise, which it does sort of sound like a fine line, but often if you pick up magazines and sort of leaf through the magazines and look through some of the articles, the terms are often used interchangeably. And
that's true.
They are, technically they're not, and I think it matters to some extent in understanding what the terms mean. So if I may, I'd like to start with what physical activity is.
Please.
Which is kind of, as the name implies, anything that requires the utilization of energy through muscular movement. So physical activity could mean walking up the block, it could be doing your laundry, it could be shopping for groceries, it could be caring for your children, it could be playing frisbee. None of which are done at a certain time or at a certain intensity or a certain number of minutes per week. It's just being physically active, walking up the stairs as opposed to taking the elevator. And physical activity, as a broad definition, just doing things outside, gardening is another great example, burns calories, and as a result, that type of lifestyle approach is very beneficial to your overall health.
Right, so that's all part of like what we would also refer to as activities of daily living. Just to get out and about, just to get around. You can make some choices, like you gave a choice that you can take an elevator rather than the steps if you so choose. But one way or the other, you're going to be moving to a certain extent.
Right, and that kind of takes the pressure off, in that you don't need to belong to a gym or you don't need to put on your sneakers. It's just about trying to move as much as you can in the course of your day. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting. This is maybe a little tangent to this, but in the evolutionary biologists think that 2 million years ago, one of the important benefits of our sort of departure from the chimpanzee was our ability to do movement over long distances, sort of our endurance. Mm-hmm. And the reason they think that this is important is that it allowed us to forage for food and or hunt for food, thereby taking in greater protein calories and allowing our brains to enlarge relative to other species, and hence we are today. And so this is an important sort of natural process for humans to move. Now in our evolution, we're in a situation where we don't have to move so much. Things are brought to us. We're able to park very close to the grocery store, or we have a drive-through, and the food is readily available. So now in our evolution, there's sort of this mismatch between how hard we have to work for our nutrition versus what has been proposed 2 million years ago.
Right. I don't know that you would know the answer to this question, but I'm wondering if any of the prehistoric people were obese, or is this just completely new?
Well, I don't know if it's new, but it's certainly on the rise.
Right.
And it's even on the rise over the last 25 or 30 years, and of particular concern among our youth, where it's estimated that about, somewhere around 25 to 30% of children are overweight or obese. Maybe 20% or 25% are truly obese, but even children being overweight are at greater risks for diabetes, which is a great concern in our society.
Right. I think that's just a shocking difference, that even in the course of one's lifetime, to see this rise in all these illnesses related to obesity in children is something that I never saw when I was growing up, because you were thrown outside to go play, or you had to go to the gym every day at school. Not a formal gym, but you had gym as a period. Certainly by the time you got to high school. And all those programs now, you either have to have add-ons, you have to pay for some of the equipment, or because there's much more focus on academics, people just don't spend time at school doing those things unless they're in a particular sport. And then with the computer, everybody's sitting at their monitor. So I think there are all kinds of other reasons that contribute to this, but you're really studying, the impacts, and you're trying to get people up and moving.
Well, but I think you raise such an important point here, in that, if you're a student, and it's even true for those of us that work in offices, right? We sit at a desk, students are sitting at a desk. You come home and you want to sort of unload your stress to some extent. So maybe you just kind of chill out and not do anything. In some instances, that might be playing on the computer, mm-hmm. particularly for children, or watching television, right. Which I'm not condoning. I'm just, I think it's a fact. Kids are watching 3 hours or more of TV per day, and they're on the computer and at school for those other 8 hours. Right. So, if we really do the math, that is, 12, 13, 14 hours of sedentary behavior. Then you're doing your homework and whatnot, and then you go to bed. And that's kind of the status quo in physical activity, as opposed, when I was a child also, we would, I'm not embarrassed to say I wouldn't do so much in homework, but I would go out and play.
Right.
We'd change clothes, go out and play until dinner.
Right.
And it was truly play. And that play had a lot of physical activity, mm-hmm. whether it be, riding bicycles, or, actually playing a sport with my friends, or whatever. It was outside, it was active. And that was a very wonderful time as I think back. As a parent now, I think at least from my own perspective, it's a little scary to let my child just go out and play like I used to. We don't have the free roaming space in some instances that, from where I grew up. And I just don't think it's as easy for kids, and let alone the pressure of excelling academically and whatnot. And as you said, paying for a sport, etc., pushing kids. There's a stress with a lack of just play activity, which is so crucial in being a kid. We've kind of lost that, and it saddens me to a great extent. And schools are hurting financially. So the very first thing that comes out of education is physical education, and then the arts. But we focus on reading and arithmetic and English and those sorts of things, science, which are all very, very important. But what good is it if you know everything about literature and you are a diabetic kid? I mean, there certainly needs to be a balance, and we need to think about these sorts of just basics.
I think that you bring up a lot of social context to this, for which, none of us feel like we can really make that difference and really have that much impact. So really, what does a parent do? I mean, have you come up with any solutions in your case?
Well, I'm fortunate. My daughter is involved heavily in a sport where she does in fact train, and that's several hours per day. So it's not an issue in my own life, but I think my recommendation to families that maybe their child hasn't found a sport or an activity that they really love is to then do something together. So a great example is taking a walk in a park, and I don't mean to make that sound corny. Like, if a family goes out together and walks, encourages the children, or to ride a bike, or to just enjoy nature, walk around a pond, something where the family is doing physical activity together, that becomes habitual, and it becomes part of what kids think is normal behavior, which will transcend into their adult life. And so that's the kind of thing I would recommend. Or putting up a basketball hoop out on your garage and playing with your children. That's the other thing we don't do. Even my parents, who are not athletes, would play with us from time to time, and people are outside doing things as a community, as a group. And I don't see that in families either, because not only is the child coming home and doing homework and focusing on that sort of thing, parents are also working long hours, and when parents come home, they don't really want to play frisbee with their kids. They've got other things to do. But
I think you're making such a basic point, but it's such a good point. And that is, it's the simple things that people can do if they're aware. You're creating awareness in our listeners. And I think that's really important, because there's so many things going on. It's so easy not to do these things unless you have awareness, and then you start planning. And you start making it a family and shared goal. And your family may be, the mom and dad together with one or two or more children, or it could be just one parent with one child. I mean, whatever the combination is. Or if kids really want their friends to come over, you require that the friends come with you. Somehow make it a group activity, because it's not just the physical movement, it's really the social context, and you really have a chance to spend some time with your child.
And so I think maybe that's a good segue to define then exercise, which is a subcomponent of physical activity. So, but exercise has a plan. Exercise is, I want to train for something. So, the best example would be, I want to be a baseball player or a softball player. And so I want to be able to swing the bat as forcefully as possible. So that would require some sort of regime, a focused, dedicated time where I'm working muscles to help me swing the bat X number of times per week, maybe as hard as I could swing the bat, et cetera, so that my strength gains would allow me to have the strength and power necessary to swing the bat. For public health, I think many folks are interested in trying to lose weight. So, you could develop an exercise program. I'm going to do the stair climber for 15 minutes a day for 5 days per week at X intensity of my target heart rate or something. So now there are all these rules and all these sort of other issues that you need to consider. You need to map out the time, you need special clothes, you might need special equipment. And so I'm not downing on exercise, I think it's a very important element, but it's a little different than that physical activity because you could just go out and garden and burn calories. There's a health benefit associated with that, as opposed to this regimented exercise sort of mentality.
You sound like when I say to my mother, Mom, you really should go to the gym. Now, she's 91, but she does go to the gym and she takes yoga twice a week, which I give her a lot of credit for doing. But she said, I don't have to go to the gym. I garden. I do this. I do that. So we have this little tug of war that goes on at times where I really want to push her to do a little more exercise because I somehow feel that there's better health benefit in that. So correct me. Am I wrong?
Well,
she thinks I'm wrong. So I want it on tape. Joe, this is like a pivotal moment.
Mothers are always right. And I think from a health perspective, your mom is correct. But there are added benefits from the exercise. I think there are psychological benefits. You just feel really good after you overcome the struggle of exercise, the endorphins and whatnot makes you feel good. And there's no doubt that there's a when you're gardening, you're working at a relatively low intensity. When you're exercising, you're generally working at a higher intensity. And there's no doubt that the higher the intensity of the work, the better outcomes you could potentially have. But again, it comes back to the psychology, because if the gym part, the exercise part becomes like a pressurized response, it could sway people away from participating. So for me, the way I kind of view this is it's kind of like a bipartisan effort. I try to increase my activity the best that I can. So at Penn, I'll generally do public transportation to the train station, walk at least one way, which is not so far from maybe 3/4 of a mile to campus. It's on a beautiful day, that's 1.5 miles of physical activity,
that's
just
great.
Walking, and then a couple days per week doing truly exercises, jogging, that sort of thing. And as a combination, I'm shooting for expending somewhere around 1,500 calories per week. That's the kind of the magic number, because that's the number of both are expending calories, but if you could make 1,500 calories per week with physical activity / exercise, that's where cancer and heart disease and diabetes and obesity and all diseases fused together, all-cause mortality, decreases about 25 or 30%.
All right, now let's translate that. 1,500 calories is what? Tell our audience what that would look like to them.
That's a very important issue. So, and it's kind of daunting how few calories we actually expend doing things. So for every mile that you walk and or run, it doesn't matter how you accomplish that mile distance, that is about 100 kilocalories for a person that weighed maybe 150 or 160 pounds.
That's not very much.
So if you were 200 pounds, it would be a little bit more. If you're 100 pounds, it's a little bit less. But every mile is about 100 calories. And it's not a lot. That's equal to 3 or 4 peanut M&Ms. That's how many calories would be 3 or 4 peanut M&Ms.
Right. Don't even buy it. Don't even buy it. So you would have to walk 15 miles a week. Yes. In order to keep yourself in that zone of 1,500 calories, because 100 times 15 miles is 1,500 calories.
So this absolutely matches what the guidelines suggest. And if you actually timed yourself on a walk, a stroll, maybe 20 minutes per mile, is not so far off the mark for most people. And so if you then walked for 60 minutes in the course of the day, you would have 3 miles. If you did that 5 times per week, there's your 1,500 calories.
Right, but when you go home, no cookies.
Well, if you maybe one cookie, but the cookie will obviously offset that caloric expenditure. So we don't expend many calories during the actual exercise activity session, but it does raise your metabolism after the session to a certain extent. And so you are able to take in probably a few more calories to maintain your energy balance. But you know, even if weight was not the issue, just that assumption of 1,500 calories per week of activity, independent of whatever's happening diet-wise, is good for your health.
Right, but I would say that takes planning. I don't know that too many people I know are walking here, there, and everywhere to have, you know, an hour's worth of walking activity in a day. I mean, you may walk to your car, you may park it, you may walk to work. Everybody's looking for that parking spot like right next to their office, so they don't have to walk. They don't have to spend the time walking. So it takes time, it takes planning, and a knowledge that, you know, you have to really plan to do this if you're going to stay within those guidelines.
So this is fun because you keep raising very excellent points. It doesn't have to be all at the same time. You could do it's the accumulation throughout your day. So it's likely you don't have 1 hour at a given time to spend doing something. But what if you did 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes at lunch, 20 minutes in the evening? That's still an hour. That's still the same number of calories assumed as if you did it continuously. Say you are capable of doing exercises at higher intensities. So now maybe you run 3 miles, and there are folks that run 3 miles in 18 minutes or less.
Right.
I'm very jealous of them, but
I know, they're all young.
they're young and they're extremely fit. But even, let's say you run 10 minutes per mile is a realistic running pace in 30 minutes. And so now you cut down that amount of time allotment and still get those 1,500 calories in. And so it's a game where you're balancing out how many minutes you're putting into it to make your plan against how fast you're able to assume a given pace.
Right. You know, I can so relate to this because for reasons I can't even explain, let alone discuss in a show format, at the age of 50, I suddenly woke up one day and decided I wanted to run a marathon. Now, this is someone that never ran, hates to sweat, and there were all kinds of like deep psychological reasons why I wanted to do this. But when I joined the training program, which took 5 months to train and get ready for the Marine Corps Marathon, what I noticed right from the beginning is that even with this really intense exercise, we started, you know, walking briskly, then we would run a little bit, and then we would walk briskly and run a little bit. Even when we were doing that, you know, 3, 4, 5 miles every week, we would ramp up the mileage. I wasn't losing any weight. I kept thinking, gosh, I don't eat that much to begin with. Maybe not all the right foods, and probably I needed more salads and more fruits, etc. But I was amazed that with that much exercise, from starting with a baseline of almost zero, other than physical movement on a day-to-day basis, I was really not losing weight. I actually had to go on a Weight Watchers-like regime by just, you know, following the Weight Watchers guideline. Before pairing that with the exercise, I actually lost 10 pounds. It was the hardest thing to really understand that physiology in back of that. Can you shed some light on that?
So really, really important points that, again, so even in training for a marathon, if you were accumulating, say, 50 miles per week, and your body innately starts to want substrates or nutrition that builds back what you expended, which are largely carbohydrates. So if you match your caloric intake with your expenditure, and 50 miles a week would be really a lot, you know, to even train for a marathon. I think it's not too far from the truth that, you know, non-competitive marathoners are running somewhere between 30 to 50 miles per week. Some more, some less, but you could do a marathon if you trained and spaced out your runs in that sort of way. Anyway, if you ate and paid back what you consumed, and your body's telling you to do that, so you're kind of low on sugar after these long runs, so you're low on glycogen, and so there's intense craving to pay back these carbohydrates, and if that's in balance, you won't see weight loss. If you then lower those number of calories, as you did, and you're expending a relatively high number of calories, you'll then see this weight loss. Every pound of weight of fat loss requires 3,500 calories of a deficit. So you need, on your weekly intake against your weekly output, a deficit of 3,500 calories. That would be equivalent to 1 pound of fat. Our bodies store and this is a lean person of 12% body fat, 75,000 calories worth of fat energy. It's enormous. And the other point I'd like to make about this is body weight may not be the thing that is going to shift the way people might expect it to. You were probably leaner even though you hadn't lost body weight. You probably had a little bit increased muscle mass.
Definitely.
And water weight is part of these carbohydrates that are coming in. So you might weigh the same, but you're leaner, you're fitter, and it's almost the body fatness as opposed to the body weight might be the better marker of thinking about
That's
this.
really what happened. I mean, it was only 10 pounds on the scale, but I definitely looked different because I was leaner and I felt fabulous. I didn't keep it up, I have to really admit, because it took a lot of time. But in our closing moments, because this is so interesting, our time has just flown by, give our audience some tips. I mean, in terms of time, duration, what would be a good thing for our audience to consider doing?
So the suggestion I would like to make is only from a health perspective. I'm not talking about training for a sport or running a marathon. This is just for the public health. That there is a simple acronym to think about: FIT. F is for frequency. The frequency should be most days of the week. So that would be, 4 or more days per week. You should be doing something where you're expending calories. What's that something? From a health perspective, that something should be where you're using large muscle groups repetitively for minutes at a time, 10, 12 minutes at a time. It could be longer, but if it's much shorter, you're not going to have the same sort of caloric expenditure. So you're looking at trying to acquire 150 minutes per week, most days of the week doing it. And how hard should you do it? Well, there's a range of intensities that the I, F stands for frequency, I stands for intensity. How hard should you do it? You should be able to have a conversation. That's about a 60% of your maximum level. And then the time would vary on how hard you're doing it, as we discussed. Like, you can't run really hard for 1 hour. Not all folks can run really hard for 1 hour. Some can. So maybe if you're running, maybe it's only a 20-minute exercise session.
Yeah.
If you're walking, maybe it's a 60-minute exercise session, somewhere where it's adding up to 150 miles per week. So FIT, frequency, most days of the week, intensity, be able to still talk. That would suggest you're not going above to a dangerous intensity.
Right.
And time, where you're trying to accrue 150 minutes of total activity per week. That would be the good way to think about it.
That is really great. I mean, with that kind of prescription, I actually can start looking at what I'm doing and say, if I'm really honest with myself, is it 150 minutes? Probably not. And how can I add to that? And the second is, to really use those large muscle groups and to really, move around and to, again, find a way to really balance this in the course of one's life and make it a priority, because if it feels too much like a job, you're not going to do it. For me, running a marathon was a lifetime achievement. I felt phenomenal about it. Was I going to be a runner for the rest of my life? No. But there are things that I got from that really did help to inform me about how to be healthier through the course of my life. And I hope that some of the tips that Joe gave us today will help you with your prescription for success. Thank you very much. And Joe is going to be talking with us in subsequent shows about some of the finer points for certain diseases. So if you have cardiac problems, if you're a diabetic, how you can customize some of these prescriptions for your situation. Thank you again for being with us. Have a wonderful day. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today and that the information will help you in meeting your health goals. Catch this program and other conversations on the website, drnancyrn.com. Or you can write to me as well. I welcome your comments and feedback. Thank you for listening, and join us again. And remember, with health all things are possible.